So Mindhunter is a TV show, if you don't know, on Netflix currently. The new season just came out, season 2, but before I talk about that, which will be the main center of this video, I want to talk about season 1 really quick, give my brief thoughts on it, my impressions, and what I liked about it, maybe what I didn't like.
It's not easy butchering people. It's hard work. Physically and mentally, I don't think people realize you need to vent.
So season 1 was released 2 years ago now, and it was a show that, on impact, I liked, but I didn't love. I watched the first 2 episodes. Episode 1 I thought was okay, and episode 2 I thought was good, and I left it for about 6 months. And it was mostly because I just didn't really get hooked by it. With TV shows, I normally give about 2 episodes, and if I don't get hooked, then I usually just don't finish them. But something did pull me back to the show. Maybe it was the fact that David Fincher was attached, maybe it was because it was about serial killers, and I find that very interesting, but something pulled me back. And on episode 3, the show seemed to just take off. From episode 3 on, the show became almost brilliant. I loved every single episode and every single plot involved in the show. And I mean, it's a very simple premise. It's just about 2 FBI agents that interview serial killers and try to develop a profile to help them identify and maybe stop serial killers in the future. Because the term serial killer was not really around. It was just people that killed multiple people, and it wasn't very many at that. That wasn't a broad term used. So they're developing this profile, and it was very groundbreaking at the time. And so that was pretty much all that season 1 was. You have some character relations, you have some subplots between different characters doing different things, this and that. And it was super simple, and I absolutely loved it.
He was feeling for a light when something bumped him. That's when we found the little girl hanging from this pipe.
So I'm going to talk about some negatives I have of season 2, because most of this video is just going to be gushing about it. I love season 2, not as much as season 1, but I still really enjoyed season 2. But there are a few things that bothered me more than in season 1. And the number one thing that bothered me about this is that the main character of season 1, Holden Ford, who is the developer of this FBI program, is not nearly as interesting or as involved in this season as he is before this in season 1. He has, at the end of season 1, a panic attack after a serial killer hugs him and kind of freaks him out. And so at the beginning of this season, they start seeing that he has panic attacks. He has a couple during the episode. He tells a couple people about it, and they're kind of talking about it and how they're going to proceed going forward with his panic attacks. And after that, it's almost non-existent, I would say. There's a couple of episodes where they talk about it, or they say, I'm not sure he should go alone to do this thing, because what if he has a panic attack and he ruins things for us? But I would say after episode 6, it's just not mentioned anymore. It just isn't a factor at all, and based on where the characters end up at the end of the season, it literally has no effect on anything, so I'm not even sure why it was introduced in the first place. And that's kind of it for me. I have a few nitpicks in the last few episodes. Episodes 6 through 9 start to feel a little bit repetitive, because Holden is saying, we're looking for this particular guy, and then they say, oh, I don't think so, and I don't think so, and I don't think so. And it's just like this repetition of him saying this thing and them not believing him, and him saying it again and not believing him, and then they eventually believe him, and it's like, okay, I can gather that he was right from the start. So I wish that that was tightened up a bit, and I wish that the panic attacks elements was more fleshed out or had some effect on the story, and it really doesn't. But aside from that, the show is amazing again. It's incredibly well made. It is gorgeous to look at. It might be the best looking TV show on air right now. It's absolutely gorgeous. The music is phenomenal. The performances are all amazing. The dialogue is incredibly interesting and well written. The editing is really tight, and it keeps things constantly moving and interesting. And the serial killers as a thing, just being in the show in general, is interesting. I like to see them probe serial killers' brains and try to understand how they think, because I find that stuff very fascinating. I think serial killers and how their brains work is so intriguing because it is so different than everyone else. They're so much like us and yet not at all. It feels like they're almost a different species. So I find that all very interesting. But aside from all the technical stuff and the show's premise, there is a lot that I really appreciate about Season 2, and it's particularly down to the thematics that are at play here. Again, it's not as simple as Season 1. Season 1 was just about them interviewing and developing profiles and then how that affected their home lives. And that was majorly it, as far as I can remember. I haven't seen it for a year and a half. But Season 2 has that same elements. It has them going to doing some interviews, but it's majorly about finding people. It's about helping people find serial killers, and that's essentially what Season 2 is all about. The last half of the season is almost all set in Atlanta, Georgia, where they go to help find the killer of like 20 some odd children that have been brutally killed and dumped. So they go down to help try and figure that out, and that is largely what the season ends up being about, is that thing. But it's only in the last 5 or so episodes. The first 1 through 4 are sort of just developing the characters and getting you back in the mindset of the show. They go do a couple interviews, they're worried about Holden's panic attacks, and you see their home lives and how they are holding up with what happened to them at the end of Season 1. So all that's very interesting, and I really like what they do with that. But I think the star of the show is Bill Tench, Holden's partner, who takes center stage as the main character here. And his home life is by far the most interesting and by far the most brutal.
It's statistically rare for serial killers to cross racial lines, sir.
It's also statistically significant that the Klan kills black people.
He's trying to hold down his marriage, trying to rebuild his family, all while being away for most of the week, helping try to find serial killers in Atlanta, Georgia. So he's flying back and forth between the family, trying to hold that down, trying to hold this down, and he's just spread so thin. And that is by far the most interesting part of the show. You have Wendy as well, who's very interesting. She kind of gets a new girlfriend, and you see how her life revolves around that, what she does, how she kind of handles it, what kind of person she is in that scenario. All that's very interesting as well. But Bill is by far the standout. You watch him just try so hard to balance his life, and it just doesn't work. And at the end, it just like crashes around him, and it is so gut-wrenching to watch. The characters are all left in an incredibly dark place.
This is one predator.
What if you're wrong?
I'm not.
And I really like that approach. I feel like this is going to be a 3-season affair. I think after Season 3 it will be over, and that typically because trilogies are, you start off with the setup and it's kind of lighthearted, and then the middle chapter is always the darkest, and the third one is the resolution. And this is what Season 2 feels like. It feels like the dark chapter of the Mindhunter series. Everyone is miserable, everything sucks, and that's where it leaves you. And I loved it. And it's not just that the characters are incredibly interesting and well fleshed out. There's a lot of themes that are going on with this Season 2. Now that it's a lot more complicated as far as characters go, and less of the interviewing serial killers, less of the intrigue, I would say. There are more themes that it explores. There's themes of the people versus numbers type of thing, where cops see real people's pain as just a number. There's a lot of moments when they say to people whose children have died that it's not conclusive, or the numbers don't point to this or that, and they kind of brush them off because the numbers aren't correct. And it's very difficult to watch because you watch these people who have lost somebody just be brushed off as a number. And that's a big theme in this show that it really fleshes out.
How do we catch a fantasy head?
If it's any good, you can't.
But that's essentially everything I got out of the season. I loved it. I absolutely loved this season of this show. I think this is one of the best shows on TV right now. And if you haven't seen it or are questioning whether you should continue in it, I'd say you should push through to the end because it is fascinating. It's incredibly interesting to see how the characters work. It's incredibly interesting to see how they use their information about serial killers to their benefit. It's incredibly interesting to watch how their lives evolve or devolve because of their work. It's interesting to see the themes of the law, how the law works, the people behind these killings, the serial killers. It's all very interesting, and it does it in such a concise way. It's only 9 episodes, 9 hours, and it wraps all of this up in a 9-hour TV show, and I feel like that's incredibly impressive. Anybody else, I mean, you look at Nicholas Winding Refn, who just did a similarly styled show about a cop, and it's like 16 hours, and it feels bare bones at best, but here it's just so jam-packed with content. Almost every scene is interesting or has something it wants to say. And I really respect that about this show in particular. It seems like one of the only shows on right now that's doing this, that's cutting the fat, that's making everything hard-hitting and interesting. And I love it, and I can't wait to see where it goes in season 3. So that's it. Goodbye.